I donated a kidney to save my son, Brandon. 3 days after the surgery, I was still bleeding through my bandages when he handed me a stack of papers. I thought they were discharge instructions. They were eviction papers. He was sending me to a nursing home so he could turn my bedroom into a gym for his wife. I sat there, broken, holding the pen to sign away my life. But then, the doorbell rang. It was my surgeon, Dr. Patel. She was looking panicked. She wasn't there to check my stitches. She was there to deliver news that would freeze the blood in Brandon's veins and change the course of my life forever. Before I tell you how a 69-year-old man turned the tables on the people who left him for dead, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you believe betrayal should always have a price. My name is Gerald Patton, and I am 69 years old. For 40 years, I built bridges across the Mississippi River. I worked with steel and concrete, materials that are hard and unforgiving, just like the world can be. But nothing prepared me for the hardness of my own son's heart. I woke up in the recovery room with a throat as dry as sandpaper. The anesthesia was wearing off, leaving behind a dull, throbbing ache in my lower back, where my left kidney used to be. That kidney was now inside Brandon. I blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights, trying to find a familiar face. I expected to see gratitude. I expected to see a tearful son holding my hand, thanking me for giving him a second chance at life. Instead, I smelled pepperoni and stale grease. My vision cleared. Brandon was sitting in the visitor chair, scrolling through his phone with one hand and shoving a slice of pizza into his mouth with the other. He looked healthy. His color was already returning. The transplant had worked. Sitting next to him was his wife, Courtney. She was filing her nails, looking bored, as if she were waiting for a delayed flight rather than sitting with her father-in-law, who had just undergone major organ surgery. "Water," I croaked. My voice was a broken whisper. Brandon didn't look up. He just chewed louder. Courtney sighed, a heavy, dramatic sound that filled the small room. She didn't move to get the pitcher on the table. She didn't call the nurse. She just looked at Brandon and said, "I told you this would take too long. The Wi-Fi in this hospital is garbage, Brandon. I cannot upload my story if the connection keeps dropping." Brandon finally glanced at me. There was no warmth in his eyes, just a cold calculation. "Dad, stop being dramatic. The nurse said you need to wait an hour before drinking. You just woke up." I tried to shift in the bed, but a sharp bolt of pain shot through my side. I gasped. I needed help adjusting the pillows. I reached out a trembling hand toward my son. "Brandon, please," I whispered. "My back." He rolled his eyes. He actually rolled his eyes. He wiped his greasy hands on his jeans and stood up, but not to help me. He walked to the window and looked out. His back turned to my suffering. "You know, Dad, this whole surgery has been a logistical nightmare for me. I have been away from the office for 3 days. My investors are getting nervous. Do you have any idea how much money I am losing by sitting here watching you sleep?" I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the operating room temperature. I had just cut a part of myself out for him. I had gone under the knife, risked my life at my age because he had cried on my shoulder 6 months ago saying he wasn't ready to die. Now he was worried about his investors. Courtney chimed in, blowing on her nails. "And the smell, Brandon. It smells like old people and antiseptic in here. Can we please just go? He is awake. He is fine. The doctors do this every day." I closed my eyes. I wanted to believe it was just the stress talking. I wanted to believe that deep down, they were just tired and scared. But the way Brandon chewed that pizza, the way Courtney looked at me like I was a stain on her designer dress, told me otherwise. I lay there in silence for 2 more hours. They didn't speak to me again. They spoke to each other about a vacation they were planning to Cabo next month. A vacation they were booking on a credit card I knew was maxed out. I fell asleep to the sound of them laughing about a waiter they had fired last week. I didn't know it then, but that laughter was the soundtrack to my destruction. 3 days later, the discharge process was a blur. I was still weak. Every bump in the road sent a shockwave of agony through my incision. Brandon drove my truck. He drove fast, hitting potholes without slowing down. I sat in the passenger seat, clutching a pillow to my stomach, gritting my teeth. Courtney was in the back, talking loudly on speakerphone to her friend about a new yoga studio she wanted to join. When we pulled into the driveway, I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Home. My home. The house I had bought 30 years ago. The house where I had raised Brandon after his mother passed. I just wanted to get into my bed, surround myself with my familiar things, and heal. But as I stepped out of the truck, leaning heavily on my cane, I saw it. There were black trash bags lined up on the porch. 5 of them. They were bulging, misshapen, and tied with aggressive knots. My heart skipped a beat. "What is this?" I asked, pointing with my cane. "Did we miss trash day?" Brandon walked past me, not offering an arm to help me up the stairs. He unlocked the front door and held it open, but he didn't step aside. He stood there, blocking the entrance. "We need to talk, Dad. Go sit in the living room." I hobbled inside. The house felt different. The air was stagnant, and then I noticed the walls. The photos. My photos. The pictures of my late wife. The photos of Brandon's graduation. The picture of me receiving my engineering award. They were gone. The walls were bare. "Where are my pictures?" I asked, panic rising in my throat. Courtney walked in behind me, kicking the door shut with her heel. "Oh, those?" They were cluttering up the aesthetic. "We put them in storage. Or the garage. I don't remember." I sank onto the sofa. It was the only piece of furniture that hadn't been moved. Brandon stood in front of me. He didn't sit. He loomed over me, holding a manila envelope. He looked like a prosecutor about to deliver a verdict. "Dad, we have been looking at the finances," Brandon started, his voice devoid of emotion. "This surgery, the recovery, it is going to be expensive. And let's be honest, you are not getting any younger. You need professional care, care that Courtney and I cannot provide." I looked at him, confused. "I am fine, Brandon. I just need a few weeks of rest. I can cook for myself. I can walk. I am not an invalid." Brandon threw the envelope onto the coffee table. It landed with a heavy slap. "It is not just about your health, Dad. It is about the house." "The house?" I whispered. Courtney stepped forward, crossing her arms. "We need the space, Gerald. Brandon's business is expanding. He needs a home office. And I need a dedicated studio for my live streams. Your bedroom has the best light. We cannot have you coughing and shuffling around in the background while we are trying to build a brand. It is just not professional." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. My bedroom? The room I had shared with his mother? "So," Brandon continued, pointing a finger at the envelope, "I have made arrangements. There is a facility called Shady Pines. It is 20 miles north. They have a bed open. The shuttle will be here in 45 minutes. Shady Pines. I knew that place. It was a state-funded warehouse for the forgotten. A place where the hallways smelled of urine and the staff was underpaid and overworked. "You are kicking me out?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. "I just gave you my kidney, Brandon. 3 days ago. You are standing here alive because of me, and you are kicking me out?" Brandon's face hardened. He leaned down, his hands on his knees, bringing his face close to mine. Do not guilt-trip me, Dad. You gave me a kidney because that is what parents do. It doesn't make you a saint. And it doesn't give you the right to freeload in my house forever. You signed the deed over to me last year, remember? For tax purposes, you said. Well, legally, this is my house, and I am telling you, you are leaving. Freeload. The word hung in the air like smoke. I had paid off this mortgage 10 years ago. I paid for his college. I paid for his wedding. I paid for the car sitting in the driveway. Courtney picked up one of the black trash bags from the porch and dragged it into the living room. She dropped it at my feet. Here are your clothes, she said, not making eye contact. I packed the essentials. You won't need the suits or the tools where you are going. They provide hospital gowns. I looked at the bag. My life reduced to a pile of garbage. My hands shook as I reached for the envelope. I pulled out the papers. Admission forms for Shady Pines. A surrender of residency rights. A non-disclosure agreement? What is this? I asked, pointing to the last page. Brandon snatched the paper back. Just standard stuff, Dad. It just says you won't badmouth us to the extended family. We don't need the drama. Just sign the admission papers. The driver is on his way. I looked at the pen he was holding out to me. It was a gold pen. A pen I had given him for his graduation. The irony tasted like bile in my mouth. I was trapped. I had no money. He had access to my accounts. I had no car keys. I had a fresh surgical wound and nowhere to go. I took the pen. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and humiliating. I was going to sign. I was going to let them win because I was too weak to fight. I lowered the pen to the paper. Ding dong. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. Brandon jumped. Who is that? He looked at Courtney. Did you order food? No, she said, frowning. The doorbell rang again. Longer this time, followed by a heavy pounding. Brandon huffed and marched to the door. I hope it is not the neighbors complaining about the trash bags again, he muttered. He yanked the door open. Dr. Patel stood there. She was wearing her white coat, which was strange. Doctors don't make house calls. Not anymore. And certainly not surgeons who charge $5,000 an hour. Behind her stood two uniformed police officers. Brandon froze. His arrogant posture collapsed instantly. Dr. Patel? What are you doing here? Is something wrong with the kidney? Dr. Patel didn't look at him. She stepped into the house, pushing past him. Her eyes scanned the room until they landed on me. She saw the trash bags. She saw the papers on the table. She saw the tears on my face. Her expression shifted from professional urgency to pure fury. Mr. Patton, she said, her voice steady but cold as ice. Do not sign anything. She turned to Brandon. He was backing away, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of defense. Brandon, Dr. Patel said, holding up a file. We just got the full toxicology report back from the pre-op blood work. The expanded panel, the one that takes 3 days to process. Brandon's face went pale, white as a sheet. We don't need to discuss this here, he stammered. HIPAA laws, right? You cannot discuss my medical info in front of... You waived your HIPAA rights when you filed the emergency insurance claim for the transplant. Dr. Patel cut him off. She took a step closer to him. The insurance company just denied the payout, Brandon. The entire $250,000 procedure. They denied it because your kidney failure wasn't genetic. It wasn't bad luck. She threw the file on the table, right on top of the eviction papers. It was caused by a massive overdose of anabolic steroids and cocaine. You poisoned yourself. And because it was self-inflicted drug abuse, the policy is void. You owe the hospital $250,000, and it is due immediately." The room went silent. The only sound was Courtney gasping. "Cocaine?" she screeched, turning to Brandon. "You told me you quit. You told me the money went to the business." Brandon wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the police officers. "That is not all," Dr. Patel continued, turning her gaze to me. Her eyes softened, but her voice remained made of steel. "Mr. Patton, the police are here because filing a fraudulent insurance claim for that amount is a felony. But more importantly, under the medical fraud statutes, if the recipient deceived the donor about the cause of the organ failure, the donor has legal grounds to sue for damages. Punitive damages." She looked back at Brandon, who was now trembling. "You didn't just steal a kidney from your father, Brandon. You stole it under false pretenses. And looking at these bags," she gestured to the trash bags at my feet, "it looks like you were planning to dispose of the evidence." I sat up straighter. The pain in my side was still there, but suddenly, it felt different. It wasn't the pain of a victim anymore. It was the fuel for a fire that was just starting to burn. I looked at the eviction papers. Then I looked at my son, who was sweating bullets. I put the cap back on the gold pen. The click was the loudest sound in the room. "I am not signing these, Brandon," I said. My voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It was low and rumbling, like the earth before a quake. "And I am not going to Shady Pines, but you might want to start packing." This was just the first domino, and I was about to watch them all fall. The silence in the living room was heavier than the lead aprons used in the X-ray room. My son Brandon stood frozen near the fireplace, his face a mask of terror that slowly twisted into ugly defiance. The police officers remained by the door, their hands resting near their belts, silent sentinels witnessing the disintegration of a family. But the most commanding presence in the room was Dr. Patel. She did not look like the gentle surgeon who had held my hand before I went under anesthesia. Now, she looked like a judge delivering a death sentence. She walked past the eviction papers scattered on the coffee table as if they were trash. She placed her medical file down with deliberate precision, right next to the gold pen Brandon had tried to force me to use. "You are quiet, Brandon, doctor," Patel said, her voice cutting through the tension. "Usually patients have a lot of questions when they find out they owe $250,000. Or maybe you are quiet because you already knew exactly why your kidneys failed." Brandon licked his lips. His eyes darted from me to Courtney, then to the police. "It is a mistake," he stammered, forcing a nervous laugh that sounded like dry leaves being crushed. "Labs make mistakes all the time. You know that. False positives. I take supplements, workout supplements, protein powder, creatine. Maybe that threw off the numbers." Dr. Patel shook her head slowly. It wasn't a gesture of disagreement. It was a gesture of disgust. "I am a nephrologist, Brandon. I know the difference between creatine and cocaine." The word hung in the air. "Cocaine." Courtney gasped again, her hand flying to her mouth. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into her cheek. Dr. Patel opened the file. She didn't need to read it. She had memorized the betrayal. "We found high concentrations of benzoylecgonine in your pre-op blood. That is the main metabolite of cocaine. But that alone didn't kill your kidneys. It was the cocktail. You have been stacking anabolic steroids for at least 2 years. Trendione, boldenone, drugs used on racehorses, Brandon, not humans." I sat there, my hand instinctively covering the fresh scar on my abdomen. I tried to process the words. Racehorse drugs, cocaine. While I was living on a fixed income, eating canned soup to save money for his birthday gifts, my son was spending a fortune to destroy his own body. Dr. Patel continued, her finger tracing a line on the chart. Steroids raise blood pressure. They force the kidneys to filter blood at a hyper-accelerated rate. It causes scarring. Focal segmental glomerulosclerosis. It is irreversible. And when you add cocaine, which constricts the blood vessels, you are essentially strangling your organs while whipping them to work harder. You didn't have bad luck, Brandon. You murdered your own kidneys. I looked at my son. Really looked at him. I saw the bulk in his shoulders that I had always attributed to him going to the gym. I saw the jittery energy I thought was just startup stress. It was all a lie. A chemical lie. Brandon's face turned red. He wasn't ashamed. He was angry. He was cornered. "So what?" he shouted, throwing his hands up. "So what if I took some stuff to look good?" Everyone does it. In my industry, image is everything, Dad. You have to look successful to be successful. You wouldn't understand. You spent your life playing in dirt and cement. I am a CEO. I have pressure you cannot imagine. "You have pressure?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Brandon spun on me, his finger pointing accusingly at my chest. "Don't look at me like that. Do not sit there and judge me. You are the one with the weak genetics. Dr. Patel said my kidneys were small. That is genetic, right? That is on you. If you had given me better genes, maybe my body could have handled the cycle. But no, I got your weak, pathetic organs." The room seemed to tilt. The audacity was breathtaking. He was blaming me. He was blaming his biology for his choices. Dr. Patel stepped between us, shielding me from his venom. "That is not how it works, Brandon. And you know it. But here is the reality check you desperately need. Because you lied on your medical history forms, because you denied drug use when asked explicitly 3 times, your insurance policy for the transplant is void. Fraud. That means the hospital bill is coming to you personally. The surgery, the anesthesia, the recovery room, and my fee. It totals $254,000. Courtney let out a shriek. $250,000? We don't have that. We spent the liquidity on the office lease. Brandon, you said the insurance covered everything. Brandon ran a hand through his hair, pacing frantically. "I can fix this. I can fix this. We just need to appeal. We will sue the lab. We will say the samples were contaminated." Dr. Patel closed the folder with a snap. "There will be no appeal. The police are here to take a report on insurance fraud. But that is the least of your worries." She turned to me. Her eyes were full of a deep, sorrowful apology. "Mr. Patton, medically, I cannot take the kidney back. It is inside him now. It is filtering his poisoned blood. But legally, you have rights. You donated an organ under the stipulation that it was a life-saving measure for a natural illness. He procured your organ through deceit. That is battery. That is bodily theft." Bodily theft. The phrase echoed in my mind. He hadn't just stolen my house. He had stolen a piece of my soul. Brandon laughed. It was a manic, high-pitched sound. "Theft? Are you kidding me? It is a donation. You gave it to me, Dad. It is a gift. You cannot repossess a gift." "What are you going to do? Cut it out of me right here?" He grabbed a vase from the mantel and threw it against the wall. It shattered, shards of porcelain raining down on the eviction papers. "Get out!" Brandon screamed. "All of you, get out of my house! You cannot arrest me for being sick! And you, Dr. Patel, you are fired. I will report you to the medical board for violating my privacy." One of the police officers stepped forward, his hand resting on his taser. "Sir, calm down. We are not arresting you today. We are filing the initial report. The district attorney will decide on the charges. But I suggest you stop throwing things before I add disorderly conduct to your list of problems. Courtney rushed to Brandon, grabbing his arm, not to comfort him, but to shake him. Brandon, listen to me. If we have to pay that bill, we are bankrupt. The investors will pull out if they find out you are a drug addict. You have to fix this with your father. Right now. She turned her desperate mascara-stained eyes to me. Dad, Gerald, please. He didn't mean it. It was the steroids talking. You know how he gets. He loves you. We love you. We can work this out. You can stay. You can have your room back. We will move the gym to the garage. Just tell the doctor to drop the fraud claim. Please. I looked at Courtney. 5 minutes ago, she was putting my clothes in trash bags. 5 minutes ago, I was an inconvenience. Now that I was their financial lifeline, I was family again. I slowly used my cane to push myself up from the sofa. The pain in my incision was sharp, a reminder of the knife that had cut me open for them. I looked at the eviction papers. I looked at the trash bags. And then I looked at my son. He wasn't looking at me with remorse. He was looking at me with expectation. He expected me to cave. He expected me to be the doormat I had been for 30 years. He thought that because I was his father, I was obligated to absorb his sins. He blamed my genes. He blamed my weakness. I took a deep breath. The air in the house felt toxic. I am not staying, I said. My voice was steady, stronger than it had been in years. Brandon blinked. What? You have to stay. You have nowhere else to go. You have no money. I froze your accounts, remember? I smiled. A cold, sad smile. You are right. You took my money. You took my house. You took my kidney. But you forgot one thing, Brandon. I walked toward the door, past the police officers, past Dr. Patel, who watched me with respect. You forgot that I built bridges for a living. I know exactly how much weight a structure can take before it collapses. And you? You just overloaded the foundation. I turned to Dr. Patel. Doctor, please give the police everything they need. Every test result. Every lie he told. I want it all on the record. Dad! Brandon screamed, lunging forward. But the officer blocked his path. You cannot do this. I am your son. You owe me. I didn't look back. I stepped out onto the porch. The cool evening air hit my face. It smelled of rain and freedom. Behind me, I heard Courtney sobbing about her credit score. I heard Brandon cursing the world. I walked down the steps, past the trash bags that held my life. I didn't pick them up. I left them there. I didn't need old clothes. I was walking into a war, and I needed to travel light. I reached the sidewalk and realized I had no car. Brandon had the keys. The rain started to fall, cold drops mixing with the sweat on my forehead. I was 69 years old. I had a fresh surgical wound. I had $0 in my pocket. And I had never felt more powerful. I walked to the corner payphone outside the convenience store. I didn't even know if it still worked. I lifted the receiver. There was a dial tone. I fumbled in my pocket and found a single quarter that had been there since before the surgery. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 20 years, a number I had memorized for an emergency just like this. The line rang 4 times. Then, a gruff, gravelly voice answered. Leo Katz Law Firm. We sue wolves for a living. Speak. Leo, I said, leaning my forehead against the cold metal of the phone booth. It is Gerald. Gerald Patton. There was a pause. Then the voice softened, just a fraction. Gerald, I haven't heard from you since the bridge collapse of '98. Is everything okay? No, Leo, I said. watching the lights of my former home flickered as the storm rolled in. Nothing is okay. But I need you to do something for me. I need you to find the file from 2 years ago. The deed transfer. The one with the life estate clause? Leo asked sharply. I told you that boy was trouble when you signed it. Did he try to pull something? He didn't just pull something, Leo. He tried to bury me. But I am not dead yet. I need to know if that clause is still valid. If the signature is real, it is valid, Leo growled. It grants you the right to live there until your heart stops beating. Why? Did he kick you out? He tried, I said. But Leo, there is something else. Something I never told you. Something I never told anyone. I took a breath, watching the rain wash away the dust on the street. I need you to look into the statute of limitations for paternity fraud. And I need you to prepare a lawsuit for gross ingratitude. Leo whistled low and long. Gross ingratitude? Gerald, in this state, that allows you to revoke a gift, even a house. Are you sure you want to go nuclear? I looked back at the house one last time. I saw Brandon's shadow in the window, still arguing, still destroying. I am not going nuclear, Leo. I am just detonating the bomb he built himself. I will meet you at the diner on 4th Street. Bring the paperwork. I hung up the phone. The rain soaked through my thin shirt, but I didn't feel the cold. I felt the fire. The first battle was over. The war had just begun, and I was done bleeding for people who only wanted to see me die. The rain was not cleansing. It was freezing. It hammered against my shoulders, soaking through the thin fabric of my shirt within seconds. Each drop felt like a tiny needle, but they were nothing compared to the fire burning in my side. I walked away from the payphone, my cane clicking rhythmically on the wet pavement. Click, step, drag. Click, step, drag. That was my new cadence, the rhythm of a man who had been discarded. I did not look back at the house. I knew if I turned around, I might do something I would regret. I might beg, or I might break down the door and do something violent. So I kept my eyes on the cracked sidewalk, illuminated only by the passing headlights of cars that splashed dirty water onto my trousers. I walked for 3 blocks. It does not sound like a long distance, but when you are 3 days post-op from a nephrectomy, 3 blocks is a marathon. My body was screaming at me to lie down, to curl up in the grass and surrender. But the anger kept me upright. The anger was a steel rod in my spine. I found a place called the Sleep Easy Motel. The neon sign was missing the letter S, so it just read the Leap Easy. It was a single-story U-shaped building that smelled of exhaust fumes and damp rot. It was the kind of place where people went to hide, or to engage in transactions they didn't want their spouses to know about. It was the kind of place Brandon would never set foot in, not even to wipe his shoes. Now, it was my sanctuary. I pushed open the door to the lobby. A bell jingled weakly. The clerk was a young man with headphones around his neck and a complexion that suggested he hadn't seen the sun in days. He didn't look up from his phone. "One night," I said. My voice was rough. He slid a registration card across the counter without making eye contact. $60, plus a $20 deposit for the key. No pets, no smoking. Oh. Checkout is at 11. I reached for my wallet. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer physical exertion of remaining standing. I pulled out my debit card, the blue one, the one connected to the joint account I had shared with my late wife, and then, foolishly, added Brandon to for estate planning purposes. I handed it to him. He swiped it through a machine that looked like it belonged in a museum. I waited. I needed to get into a room. I needed to inspect my wound. I could feel the dampness spreading on my bandage, and I knew it wasn't just rain. It was warm. It was blood. The machine beeped. A harsh, dissonant sound. The clerk frowned. He swiped it again, harder this time. Beep. Declined, he said, finally looking at me. His eyes lingered on my wet clothes, my cane, and the pale, sweating pallor of my face. Do you have cash? My heart hammered against my ribs. Declined. That was impossible. There was over $40,000 in that account. It was my retirement savings. It was the money from the sale of my boat. It was the emergency fund. Try it again, I said, gripping the counter. Please. It must be the chip. He sighed, the exaggerated sigh of someone who deals with desperate people every night. He wrapped the card in a plastic bag and swiped it a third time. Declined, old man. Look, the screen says pick up card. That means the bank flagged it. Stolen or frozen. Frozen. The word echoed in the small, dingy lobby. Brandon hadn't just evicted me. He hadn't just stolen my kidney. He had severed my arteries. He knew I would need money for a hotel. He knew I would need food. He had logged in and locked me out before I even got into the car. He wanted me on the street. He wanted me to crawl back to him, begging for a bed at Shady Pines. I stared at the card in the clerk's hand. It was just a piece of plastic, but at that moment, it represented 40 years of labor. Keep it, I whispered. I dug into my pockets. I found the $20 I kept folded in my wallet for emergencies, and a crumpled 10 I had found in my jacket pocket earlier. $30. Not enough for the room. I looked at the clerk. I am a veteran, I said. Do you have a discount? He looked at the money on the counter. Then he looked at the dark circles under my eyes. He hesitated. For a second, I saw a flicker of humanity in his face. $40, he muttered. Cash. No deposit. But if you trash the room, I am calling the cops. I didn't have 40. I had 30. I placed my watch on the counter. It was a simple Timex, nothing fancy, but it worked. Take this, I said. He swiped the cash and pushed the key across the counter. Keep the watch. Room 104. Around the back. I took the key. I didn't say thank you. I didn't have the energy for gratitude. I just turned and walked out into the rain. Room 104 was exactly what I expected. The carpet was sticky. The wallpaper was peeling in the corners like sunburned skin. There was a single bed with a bedspread that had a pattern designed to hide stains, but it was dry. I closed the door and locked it. Then I slid the chain lock into place. It was a flimsy piece of metal that wouldn't stop a determined toddler, but it made me feel slightly less exposed. I sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress sagged under my weight. I took a deep breath and began the painful process of peeling off my wet shirt. The fabric stuck to my skin. When I finally pulled it free, I looked down at my abdomen. The bandage was saturated. A dark red bloom had spread across the white gauze, mixing with the rainwater. I needed to change it, but I had no supplies, no fresh gauze, no medical tape. And, I realized with a jolt of true terror, no antibiotics. I had left the hospital bag on the table at the house. The bag with the painkillers. The bag with the immunosuppressants. I was a transplant donor. My body was trying to recover from major trauma. Without those meds, the risk of infection skyrocketed. Without the painkillers, the night was going to be an endurance test of agony. I moved to the bathroom. The light flickered and buzzed like an angry hornet. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like a ghost. My skin was gray. My eyes were sunken. I washed my hands with the tiny bar of soap that smelled of industrial chemicals. Then, I carefully peeled back the wet bandage. The incision was angry, red and inflamed, the stitches pulled tight against my skin. I hissed through my teeth as the air hit the raw wound. I didn't have rubbing alcohol. I didn't have iodine. I grabbed a hand towel from the rack. It felt rough, like sandpaper. I ran it under hot water, wringing it out until my hands burned. Then I pressed it against the wound. The pain was blinding. White hot stars danced in my vision. I bit down on my lip to keep from screaming. I tasted copper. I held the towel there, breathing in short, shallow gasps, until the bleeding slowed. I stumbled back to the bed and collapsed. I didn't get under the covers. I didn't trust them. I lay on top, shivering in my wet trousers. That was when the noise started. The walls were paper thin. From the room next door, I heard a thud. Then a voice. "You are useless!" A man's voice, slurring, drunk. "You forgot the cigarettes again." Then a woman's voice, pleading. "I am sorry. I didn't have enough money. Please don't." Another thud, the sound of a body hitting the wall, right next to my head. I flinched. The violence seeped through the drywall. It was the soundtrack of the desperate. It was a mirror of my own life. I had given everything, and I had been met with violence. Not physical blows, but emotional ones. Brandon's betrayal hit harder than any fist. My stomach growled, a deep, hollow ache. I hadn't eaten since the hospital breakfast, a bowl of oatmeal that I had barely touched. Now that the hunger was clawing at me, competing with the pain in my side, I thought about the vending machine in the lobby. I had $0 left, not a penny. I lay there in the dark, listening to the couple next door scream at each other. The woman was crying now, soft, broken sobs. I wanted to bang on the wall. I wanted to yell at the man to leave her alone. But I couldn't. I was too weak. I was a 69-year-old man who couldn't even defend his own home, let alone a stranger. The shame washed over me. Shame is a cold companion. It tells you that you deserve this. It tells you that you were stupid to trust, stupid to love. I thought about Brandon's face when he handed me the eviction papers, the look of utter detachment. How does a father raise a son to be a monster? Where did I go wrong? Did I hug him too much? Too little? Did I shield him from the world so much that he never learned the value of a dollar or a soul? The pain in my side flared up again, a rhythmic throbbing that matched my heartbeat. Thump, pain, thump, pain. I closed my eyes, but sleep was impossible. My mind was racing. Brandon thought he had won. He had the house, he had the money, he had the kidney. He thought I was just an old dog that would go off into the woods to die quietly. He thought the frozen bank account was the final nail in my coffin. But as I lay there, listening to the sirens wailing in the distance, my mind shifted. I stopped thinking about the pain. I stopped thinking about the hunger. I started thinking about the structure of things. I was an engineer. When a bridge has a structural failure, you don't just paint over it. You find the stress fracture. You find the weak point that caused the collapse. Brandon's weak point wasn't his kidney. It was his arrogance. He had left a paper trail. The insurance fraud. The drugs. The forged signature on the deed modification. He had been sloppy because he never expected me to fight back. He thought he was the predator and I was the prey. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the only thing I had left. The card Leo Katz had given me 20 years ago. It was bent and water-damaged, but the number was still legible. I placed it on the nightstand next to the Bible. "I am not going to die in this motel," I whispered to the flickering light bulb. The woman next door screamed again. Then silence. I stared at the ceiling. The water stain looked like a map of a territory I had never navigated before. The territory of revenge. I wasn't Gerald the father anymore. That man died when he signed the discharge papers. I was Gerald, the survivor. And tomorrow, I wasn't going to look for a job. I wasn't going to look for an apartment. I was going to look for a war. The cold from my wet clothes finally seeped into my bones, and my body began to shake uncontrollably. I curled into a fetal position, protecting my incision. I gritted my teeth until my jaw ached. I would endure this night. I would endure the cold. I would endure the hunger. Because every shiver, every pang of hunger, every throb of pain was a deposit in a new account, an account of rage. And Brandon was going to pay the balance with interest. I watched the red numbers on the digital clock flip. 3 a.m., 4 a.m. At 5 a.m., the rain stopped. The silence that followed was heavy. I sat up. My body was stiff. My wound felt like it was on fire. But my head was clear. I stood up and walked to the window. I pulled back the curtain. The sky was a bruised purple. The parking lot was empty except for a few rusted sedans. I didn't have money for coffee, but I had something better. I had a plan. And the first step was to find out exactly how much my son loved his new life, because I was about to dismantle it, brick by brick. The morning sun did not bring warmth. It only served to illuminate the grime of the motel room. The light filtered through the thin, cigarette-burned curtains, casting long, sickly shadows across the peeling wallpaper. I had not slept. I had spent the hours between darkness and dawn staring at the water stain on the ceiling, formulating a strategy. I was an engineer. I solved problems. My son was a problem, a structural failure in the foundation of my life, and I was going to fix it. I sat on the edge of the bed, my movements slow and deliberate. Every inch of movement sent a fresh spike of agony through my side. The lack of painkillers was catching up to me. My body was stiff, locked in a protective crouch around the missing kidney. I reached for the phone on the nightstand. I needed to call Leo Katz. I needed to start the legal avalanche. But before my hand could touch the receiver, the world exploded. Bang, bang, bang. The door shook in its frame. Dust motes danced in the shaft of light. Gerald Patton! Police! Open up! My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Police? Had Dr. Patel called them? Had they come to arrest Brandon? A surge of adrenaline, fueled by a naive hope, pushed me to my feet. I grabbed my cane. I hobbled to the door, unlocking the flimsy chain with trembling fingers. I swung the door open, expecting to see the sympathetic officers from the night before. I expected to see justice. Instead, I saw two uniformed officers I did not recognize. One was young, with a buzz cut and a jawline set in stone. The other was older, heavy-set, with eyes that had seen too many domestic disputes to have any patience left. Their hands were resting near their holsters. They were not here to help. They were here to intimidate. Gerald Patton, the older officer barked. I am, I said, leaning heavily on the cane. Step out of the room, sir. Keep your hands where we can see them. I frowned. What is this about? Is it my son? Did something happen to Brandon? The young officer stepped forward, invading my personal space. He smelled of coffee and aggression. We are not here to talk about your son's health. We are here to serve you, and to investigate a report of a credible threat of violence. A threat? I laughed, a dry, hacking sound that hurt my throat. Who did I threaten? The cockroaches under the bed? The officer did not smile. Ma'am, turn around and place your hands on the wall. Do it now. I stared at him. I am 69 years old. I had major surgery 3 days ago. I can barely stand up. Do it, he shouted. I turned slowly. I placed my hands on the rough stucco of the motel wall. The older officer patted me down. His hands were rough, checking my pockets, running down my legs. He found nothing but my wallet and the key to this wretched room. He spun me around. He shoved a clipboard into my chest. "You are being served with a temporary restraining order," the officer said. "The petitioner is Courtney Patton. She claims that yesterday evening, upon leaving the residence, you made verbal threats against her life. Specifically, that you would, quote, burn the house down with everyone inside, unquote, because they stole your money." I stood there, my mouth agape. The absurdity of it was suffocating. Courtney. Of course. She was not just greedy, she was vicious. She knew I had no money for a lawyer. She knew I was vulnerable. So she decided to paint me as a dangerous, senile maniac. "That is a lie," I whispered. "I never said that." I just left. I walked away. The officer looked at me with bored indifference. "That is for the judge to decide. Right now, this order says you are to have no contact with Courtney Patton or Brandon Patton. You are not to come within 500 yards of their residence at 240 Oak Street. You are not to call, text, or email. And," the younger officer added, stepping closer, "she also claims you were erratic, violent, that you were thrashing around and threw a vase." "I threw a vase?" I repeated, my voice rising. "My son threw the vase. He was the one on drugs. I am the victim here." "Sir, lower your voice," the older officer warned. "We also have a report that you might be abusing prescription medication, opioids, which contributes to your violent outbursts." I felt the blood drain from my face. They were flipping the script. Everything Brandon had done, the drugs, the violence, they were projecting onto me. They were building a narrative. If I was the addict, if I was the abuser, then kicking me out wasn't cruelty. It was self-defense. "I am not an addict," I said, my voice shaking with a cold rage. "I am a donor." I dropped my cane. It clattered loudly on the concrete. "Sir, pick up that weapon," the young cop shouted, reaching for his taser. I ignored him. My hands went to the hem of my shirt. I didn't care about dignity anymore. I didn't care about decency. I pulled my shirt up, exposing my torso to the morning air and the officer's judgmental eyes. "Look!" I screamed. "Look at it!" The officers froze. They looked. Across my left side, a 10-inch incision was stitched together with black thread. The skin around it was angry, purple and yellow with bruising. The gauze I had applied the night before was soaked through with fresh blood where the movement had reopened part of the wound. It was a brutal, ugly testament to what I had endured. I had a kidney removed 72 hours ago. I gasped, dropping the shirt as the pain nearly buckled my knees. I cannot tie my own shoes. I cannot walk without this cane. And you think I have the strength to burn down a house? You think I am the threat? The young officer's hand hovered over his taser, uncertain. The older officer's face softened, just a fraction. He looked at the wound, then at my face. He saw the sweat beading on my forehead. He saw the gray pallor of a man in shock. He let out a long breath. He adjusted his belt. "Jesus," he muttered. "That looks infected." "It is not infected yet," I said through gritted teeth. "But it will be if I don't get my antibiotics, which are in that house. The house you are telling me I cannot go near." The officers exchanged a look. The dynamic had shifted. They weren't dealing with a violent criminal. They were dealing with a medical emergency. But they were also bureaucrats. They had a piece of paper signed by a judge. The law was a machine, and it didn't have feelings. "Look, Mr. Patton," the older officer said, his tone less aggressive but still firm. "I don't know what happened between you and your family, but this order is valid. If you go near that house, we have to arrest you. And with that cut, you won't last a night in holding." "So what am I supposed to do?" I asked. leaning back against the wall for support. My meds are there. My clothes. My life. You can request a police escort to retrieve essential personal items, he said. But not today. You have to file a motion with the court. It takes 48 hours. 48 hours. In 48 hours, without my immunosuppressants, my body could start rejecting the trauma, or the infection could set in and kill me. Courtney knew this. Brandon knew this. This wasn't a restraining order. It was a siege. They were trying to starve me out. Here's the court date, the officer said, pointing to a line on the paper. 2 weeks from now. Tuesday at 9 a.m. If you don't show up, the order becomes permanent. And Mr. Patton? I looked up at him. Stay away from them. If she calls 911 again and says you are on the lawn, I won't have a choice. I will have to cuff you. And I don't want to do that. They turned and walked back to their cruiser. I watched them go. I watched the red and blue lights flash once before they pulled out of the parking lot. I was left standing alone in the doorway of room 104. I looked down at the paper in my hand. State of Missouri versus Gerald Patton. I felt a laugh bubbling up in my chest, a dark, dangerous laugh. They thought this piece of paper would stop me. They thought that by using the law as a weapon, they could crush me. But they had made a fatal miscalculation. By filing this order, Courtney had put her lies on public record. She had sworn under oath that I was violent. She had sworn under oath that I was an addict. I picked up my cane. I winced as I bent down, but I didn't cry out. I walked back into the room and closed the door. I picked up the phone again. I dialed Leo's number. "Leo," I said when he answered. "Change of plans." "Gerald? You sound like you just ran a marathon." "I just had a visit from the police," I said. "Courtney filed a restraining order. She claims I am violent and on drugs." I heard the sound of a chair scraping against the floor on the other end of the line. Leo was sitting up. "She put that in an affidavit?" Leo asked, his voice sharp. "She did." "Good," Leo said. "That is actually good." "How is that good, Leo?" "I can't go home. I have no meds." "Because, Gerald," Leo said, his voice dropping to a low growl, "perjury is a crime. And if we can prove she lied to get that order, we don't just get the house back. We get to destroy her credibility forever. But first, we need to keep you alive." "Where are you, Ma?" "The Sleep Easy Motel. Stay there. I am coming to get you. And I am bringing a notary and a camera. We are going to document every bruise, every stitch, and every drop of blood. If they want a war, Gerald, we are going to give them a war. But we are going to fight it in the courtroom, where facts still matter." I hung up the phone. I looked at the restraining order one last time. I folded it carefully and put it in my wallet, right next to the picture of my late wife. "You made a mistake, Courtney," I whispered to the empty room. "You tried to bury me, but you forgot that I am a seed." The Greasy Spoon Diner on 4th Street was a relic of a bygone era, much like Leo Katz and myself. The air hung heavy with the scent of burnt coffee and frying bacon grease, a smell that usually made my stomach turn. But today, it felt grounding. It was real. It was honest. Unlike the sterilized, perfumed air of my son's house, this place didn't pretend to be anything it wasn't. I sat in a booth with red vinyl seats that were cracked and taped over with silver duct tape. My cane rested against the table, a silent sentinel. I nursed a cup of black coffee, my hands wrapped around the ceramic mug for warmth. The restraining order burned a hole in my pocket. The bell above the door chimed, a harsh jingle that cut through the low murmur of the other patrons. I looked up. Leo Katz walked in. He looked exactly as I remembered him from 20 years ago, just with more gray in his beard and a few more lines etched around his eyes. He wore a rumpled brown suit that looked like he had slept in it, and he carried a battered leather briefcase that had probably seen more courtrooms than most judges. He didn't look like a high-powered attorney. He looked like a weary detective from a noir film. But I knew better. Leo was a pit bull in a cheap suit. He didn't bark. He just bit. And he never let go. He spotted me instantly. He didn't smile. He just nodded, a sharp jerk of his chin, and marched over to the booth. He slid in opposite me, groaning slightly as his knees hit the table leg. "You look like hell, Gerald," he said, placing his briefcase on the table with a heavy thud. "I feel like hell, Leo," I replied, my voice raspy. He signaled the waitress for coffee without even looking at her. Then he turned his intense, dark eyes on me. He scanned my face, noting the pallor, the sweat on my upper lip, and the way I was favoring my left side. "So," he said, leaning forward, "let me get this straight. You gave the kid a kidney. He gave you an eviction notice. And now his trophy wife says you are a violent junkie." "That sums it up," I said. Leo let out a short, bark-like laugh. "Unbelievable. I always said that boy had shiftless eyes, even when he was 12. Remember when he stole that bike and blamed the neighbor's kid? You defended him then, said he was just confused." I looked down at my coffee. "I defended him my whole life, Leo. That was my mistake. I thought love was a shield. Turns out, it was a blindfold." Leo reached into his briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of papers. They were legal documents, flagged with yellow sticky notes. "All right, enough about feelings," Leo grunted. "Feelings don't win lawsuits. Evidence wins lawsuits. Paper trails win lawsuits. And your son? He left a trail so wide a blind man could follow it." He pushed the stack toward me. "I spent the last 3 hours at the county recorder's office," Leo said. "I pulled the original deed transfer from 2 years ago, the one where you signed the house over to Brandon for estate planning." I nodded. I remembered that day. Brandon had been so solicitous. He said he wanted to protect the asset from probate court. He said it was to make sure I was secure. Leo flipped the file open. "Look at page 4, Gerald." I looked. It was a standard warranty deed. "Now," Leo said, his finger tapping on a specific paragraph. "Do you remember what we discussed when you drafted this? I told you to include a life estate reservation. It means even though he owns the bricks and mortar, you own the right to live there until you die. It is ironclad. He cannot sell it. He cannot mortgage it. And he sure as hell cannot kick you out without your permission." "I remember," I said. "I insisted on it. I saw it in the draft." Leo flipped the page. "Well, here is the document that was recorded with the county," Leo said. His voice dropped an octave. "Look at the paragraph." I squinted at the paper. My heart stopped. The paragraph was gone. In its place was a standard fee simple transfer clause. Unconditional ownership. I don't understand," I stammered. "I saw the draft. I signed the draft with the clause." Leo pulled out another document. This one was a quitclaim deed, dated 3 days after the original transfer. He filed an amendment, Gerald, a correction deed, removing the life estate restriction. And look at the signature at the bottom. I looked at the signature. Gerald Patton. It looked like my signature. The loop on the G, the sharp cross on the T. But something was wrong. I leaned closer, my breath hitching in my chest. The ink was too smooth. My hand has had a tremor for 5 years, ever since I broke my wrist on the job site. My signature always has a slight jagged edge on the upstroke of the P. This signature was fluid, confident. "That is not me," I whispered. "I never signed this. I never even saw this document." Leo slammed his hand on the table. The coffee cups rattled. "Bingo," he hissed. "I knew it. I compared it to your signature on the intake form you faxed me 10 years ago. The pressure points are all wrong. And look at the date of the notary stamp." I looked at the date. October 14th. "Where were you on October 14th, 2 years ago?" Leo asked. I closed my eyes, thinking back. October. 2 years ago. "I was in the hospital," I said, my eyes flying open. "That was when I had my gallstones removed. I was in post-op recovery all day." "Exactly," Leo said, a savage grin spreading across his face. "I checked the hospital records before I came here. You were under general anesthesia at 2 p.m. This document was notarized at 2:30 p.m. at a bank across town. Unless you can astral project, Gerald, you didn't sign that paper." I felt a cold chill wash over me. It wasn't just greed. It was a crime. A deliberate, calculated crime committed while I was lying in a hospital bed, helpless, just like he had tried to do this week. It was his pattern. He waited until I was weak to strike. "He forged my signature," I said, the realization settling in like a stone in my gut. My own son forged my signature to steal my home. "And the notary?" Leo asked. "Who is the notary?" I looked at the stamp. "Jessica V. Miller." "I don't know her," I said. Leo pulled out a photo from his pocket. It was a printout from a social media page. It showed Brandon at a college party, his arm around a young blonde woman. "Recognize her?" Leo asked. I shook my head. "That is Jessica Miller," Leo said. "She was Brandon's ex-girlfriend from business school. She works at the bank where he has his business accounts." I felt sick. It was a conspiracy of entitled children who thought the world owed them everything. "So the deed is void?" I asked. "Void ab initio," Leo said, savoring the Latin. "Void from the beginning. Fraud vitiates everything." "But Gerald, it gets better." "Better? How can this get better?" "Because he used that forged deed to take out a second mortgage," Leo said. He pulled out another paper. A loan document from a private lender. High interest. Predatory. "He borrowed $200,000 against the house last year," Leo explained. "That is where the money for his startup came from. Not investors. He used your house as a piggy bank. And because the deed was forged, that mortgage is invalid against you. The bank cannot foreclose on you. They have to go after him for fraud." My head was spinning. Brandon wasn't just a bad son, he was a criminal. He was facing prison time. "But we are not going to the police with this yet," Leo said, lowering his voice. "Why not?" I asked. "He tried to destroy me. Because if he goes to jail now, the assets get frozen. The state gets involved. It becomes a mess. We want the house back. We want your dignity back. And we want to hit him where it hurts most. His wallet. And his ego." Leo leaned in closer, his eyes gleaming. "Here is the plan. We file a civil suit first. We file for quiet title to restore the house to your name based on the forgery. We attach the hospital records proving you were unconscious when it was signed. That kills his claim to the house. Then," Leo continued, "we answer the restraining order. We don't just deny it. We countersue for defamation and abuse of process. We bring up the drug test results from Dr. Patel. We prove that he is the one with the history of erratic behavior, not you. And finally," Leo said, dropping the last bomb, "we file for revocation of gift regarding the kidney." I blinked. "Leo, we cannot take the kidney back. Dr. Patel said, I know we cannot take the organ back, Gerald, Leo interrupted. But in this state, under the theory of gross ingratitude and fraud in the inducement, if someone tricks you into a gift through lies, like lying about why they need it, you can sue for the monetary value of that gift. Leo pulled out a calculator. The average cost of a kidney transplant, including the organ acquisition cost on the open market, which is illegal but gives us a baseline for damages, plus the pain and suffering, plus the future medical costs you will incur. He punched in some numbers. We are suing him for $3 million, Leo said calmly. $3 million? I gasped. He doesn't have $3 million. I know, Leo said, but his company does. Or at least, his company has assets. And Courtney? She has a trust fund she brags about online. We pierce the corporate veil. We go after everything. We make sure that when the dust settles, he doesn't just lose the house. He loses the shirt off his back. I looked at Leo. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was an avenging angel in a wrinkled suit. But first, Leo said, softening his tone, we need to get you safe. And we need to get your meds. He pulled out his phone. I have a buddy in the sheriff's department, not the patrol boys who served you, the sheriff himself. I helped him with a nasty divorce last year. I am going to call him. We are going to get a civil standby escort. We are going to that house, Gerald. Today. Today? I asked. But the order says you cannot go there to harass her, Leo said. It doesn't say you cannot go there with a lawyer and a sheriff to retrieve life-saving medication. If they refuse to give you your medicine, that is attempted manslaughter. And I will personally handcuff Courtney if she tries to stop us. I felt a surge of hope, real hope. For the first time in 3 days, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a man with a weapon. Let's go, I said, grabbing my cane. Leo smiled, a shark-like grin. Pay the bill, Gerald. I am buying the war. We walked out of the diner together. The rain had stopped, and the sun was breaking through the clouds. It was harsh and bright. I got into Leo's car. It was an old Cadillac built like a tank. It smelled of leather and old cigars. As we drove toward the house, my house, I watched the familiar streets pass by. The park where I taught Brandon to ride a bike. The school where I watched him graduate. Every corner held a memory. Every memory was now tainted. But as the house came into view, sitting on the hill with its manicured lawn and the new SUV in the driveway, I felt a strange calm. The grief was gone. The sadness was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard engineering of justice. Leo pulled up to the curb. He didn't park in the driveway. He parked in the middle of the street, blocking the entrance. A police cruiser pulled up behind us. The sheriff stepped out, a big man with a mustache that commanded respect. He shook Leo's hand. "This the client?" the sheriff asked, looking at me. "This is the man," Leo said. "And that," he pointed to the house, "is the crime scene." "Let's get your meds, Mr. Patton," the sheriff said. We walked up the driveway. My cane clicked on the pavement. Click, step, drag. I saw the curtain twitch in the living room window. Courtney was watching. Good, I thought. Watch. Because the old man you threw out in the trash is back, and he brought the sledgehammer. I reached the front door, the same door I had been evicted from yesterday. I didn't knock. Leo knocked. 3 hard, authoritative raps. "Open up! Sheriff's Department!" There was silence. Then the sound of locks turning. The door opened. Brandon stood there. He looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot. He was wearing the same clothes as yesterday. He saw the sheriff. He saw Leo. And then he saw me. His face went white. You, you cannot be here, he stammered. The restraining order. Leo stepped forward, shoving the restraining order into Brandon's chest. Read the fine print, son, Leo growled. Exception for retrieval of emergency medical supplies. Now step aside before I add obstruction of justice to your very long list of problems. Brandon stepped back, stumbling. I walked into my house. It smelled of their expensive candles, but underneath, I could smell the rot. I didn't look at Brandon. I walked straight to the kitchen table. My bag was still there, exactly where I had left it. They hadn't even touched it. They hadn't thrown it away. They had just ignored it, like they ignored me. I opened the bag. My pills were there. I took out the bottle of immunosuppressants. I dry swallowed one right there in the hallway. Then I turned to Brandon. Courtney was standing on the stairs, her phone out, recording. "He is violating the order," she screeched. "I am live streaming this." Leo turned to her. He smiled for the camera. "Hello, Internet," Leo said. "Leo, I am Leo Katz, attorney at law, and you are filming evidence of your own cruelty. Keep rolling, sweetheart. The jury is going to love this." Courtney lowered the phone, uncertain. I walked to the door. I stopped next to Brandon. I looked at him one last time. "Enjoy the house, Brandon," I said softly, "because the next time I walk through this door, I will be holding the deed, and you will be holding an indictment." I walked out. I got back into the Cadillac. Leo started the engine. "Where to?" Leo asked. "The courthouse," I said. "We have a lawsuit to file." The van smelled of stale donuts and high-grade electronics. It was a white cargo van, the kind you see parked outside construction sites, invisible to the naked eye because it was so ordinary. On the side it said Mikey's Plumbing. We unclog your problems. It was a fitting name because Leo Katz had introduced me to Mikey not as a plumber, but as the best private investigator in the tri-state area. Mikey was a small man, with nervous energy and fingers that flew across a keyboard like a concert pianist. I sat on a crate in the back, my cane resting against my knee, watching the monitors that lined the wall. "You sure you want to see this, Mr. Patton?" Mikey asked, adjusting a frequency knob. "Most clients prefer the written report. Watching the sausage get made. It is not good for the digestion, especially for a guy with a fresh zipper on his stomach." I leaned forward, the blue light of the screens reflecting in my eyes. "I don't want a report, Mikey. I want the truth. Turn it up." We were parked across the street from a bistro called the Golden Spoon. It was the kind of place that served $20 avocado toast and charged for water. Through the tinted window of the bistro, I could see her. Courtney, my daughter-in-law. She looked immaculate. She was wearing a red dress that I knew cost more than my first car. She was laughing, tossing her hair back, checking her reflection in her spoon. She didn't look like a woman terrified of her violent father-in-law. She didn't look like a wife worried about her husband's failing health. She looked like a woman celebrating. "Who is she waiting for?" I asked. Mikey tapped a screen. "Facial recognition is running. Give it a second." "But my bet?" "It isn't Brandon. Brandon is currently at the house trying to sell his Rolex on eBay. I saw the listing pop up 10 minutes ago." I watched the screen. A man walked into the frame. He was tall, wearing a suit that was too tight and a watch that was too big. He had the polished, predatory look of a salesman who would sell his own mother for a commission. He sat down opposite Courtney. He didn't shake her hand. He reached across the table and squeezed it. Familiar. Intimate. "That is Marcus Thorne," Mikey said, reading from the database. "Real estate agent. High-end residential. He is the listing agent for your house, Mr. Patton." I felt a cold knot tighten in my chest. The realtor. The man who had convinced Brandon that selling the house was the only way to save the company. "Turn on the audio," I commanded. Mikey slid a fader up. He had planted a bug in her purse earlier that morning when she was at the gym. A tiny device slipped into the side pocket while she was busy taking selfies in the mirror. The sound was crisp. "So tell me the good news, Marcus," Courtney said, her voice purring through the speakers. "Did the open house generate any cash offers?" Marcus laughed. A slick, oily sound. "Baby, we have 3 offers. 2 are cash, but we have a problem." The title search hit a snag. Some lawyer named Katz filed a lis pendens this morning. A cloud on the title. It flags the deed as disputed. Courtney slammed her drink down. I saw her face twist on the monitor. "That old bat. I told Brandon to get rid of him. I filed the restraining order. I thought that would scare him off." "It didn't scare him. It pissed him off," Marcus said. "But don't worry. I have a buddy at the county clerk's office. We can try to expedite the sale before the lawsuit is fully processed. But we need Brandon to sign the closing papers by Friday." "Can you manage him?" "Can I manage him?" Courtney scoffed. She took a sip of her wine. "Marcus, Brandon is a mess. He is popping painkillers like candy. He thinks they are for the surgery, but I may have, let's say, not discouraged him from taking the ones that make him compliant. He is a zombie. He will sign whatever I put in front of him." I gripped my cane so hard my knuckles turned white. She wasn't just cheating on him. She was drugging him. She was keeping him sedated so she could liquidate his assets. "And what about the money?" Marcus asked, leaning in. "Once the house sells, the funds go to his corporate account." Courtney smiled. A cruel, sharp smile. "Not if he signs the disbursement authorization I prepared. It routes 80% of the sale proceeds to a consulting firm in the Caymans. A firm owned by us." I felt the bile rise in my throat. This wasn't a marriage. It was a heist. Brandon was the mark. "And then?" Marcus asked. "What happens to the boy wonder?" Courtney shrugged. "Then I file for divorce. I cite his drug use. The cocaine, the steroids. I play the victim. The brave wife who tried to save him but couldn't. I walk away with half of whatever is left, plus the Cayman money. And he goes to, well, he probably goes to jail for the insurance fraud. Or the hospital sues him into oblivion. Either way, he is not our problem anymore." I looked away from the screen. I couldn't watch her face anymore. It was too ugly. I thought about Brandon, my son. The boy I had taught to fish. The boy I had carried on my shoulders. Yes, he had betrayed me. Yes, he had stolen my kidney and my house. But hearing him talked about like livestock being led to the slaughter, it broke something inside me. And it replaced that broken piece with a cold, hard resolve. "They are not just stealing the house," I whispered. "They are burying him." Mikey looked at me, his face serious. "You want to hear the rest? Or should we switch feeds?" "Switch feeds," I said. "Show me the house." Mikey typed a command. The screen flickered and changed. Now, instead of the sunny bistro, I was looking into the living room of my own home. Courtney had installed security cameras everywhere to monitor her staff and her live streams. Ironically, she hadn't changed the factory passwords. Mikey had broken in within 30 seconds. The living room was dark, even though it was midday. The curtains were drawn. On the couch, my couch, lay Brandon. He looked like a corpse. He was wearing boxer shorts and a stained t-shirt. His skin, illuminated by the glow of the television, had a sickly yellow tint. Jaundice. His liver was struggling. or his body was rejecting the kidney. On the table in front of him was a bottle of scotch, half empty, and next to it, a bottle of pills. I watched as he reached for the glass. His hand shook so violently he spilled half the amber liquid on his chest. He didn't even wipe it off. He drank what was left and then dry-heaved. He picked up his phone. He dialed a number. Mikey synced the audio from the phone tap. "Please, Mr. Henderson." Brandon's voice came through the speakers. It was weak, slurring. "I just need a few more days. The house is sold. I promise. I have the buyers. I need you to call off the guys. They are calling my office. They are threatening to come to the house." There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. I couldn't hear the other side, but I saw Brandon's face crumble. "I know I owe you $50,000, Brandon sobbed. "I know. But the insurance. They denied the claim. I am good for it. I am Brandon Patton. I am a CEO." He listened again. Then he threw the phone across the room. He put his head in his hands and began to weep. It wasn't the crying of a man who was sorry. It was the crying of a man who was terrified. I watched him. The yellow skin, the tremors, the alcohol. "He is killing it," I said softly. "Killing what?" Mikey asked. "The kidney," I said. "My kidney. He is pouring scotch onto a fresh transplant. He is taking unprescribed meds. He is stressed out of his mind." I turned to Mikey. "Zoom in on the pill bottle." Mikey zoomed. The image was grainy, but I could read the label. Oxycodone. "That is not on his post-op list," I said. "Dr. Patel prescribed tramadol. Mild, non-addictive." "Where did he get oxy?" Mikey typed furiously. "I am checking Courtney's pharmacy records." "Bingo! She has a prescription for oxycodone from a pain management clinic in Florida. She filled it last week. She is feeding him her own pills," I realized. "She is keeping him high so he doesn't ask questions. She is chemically restraining him." I stood up. I hit my head on the low ceiling of the van, but I didn't feel it. "We have enough," I said. "Enough for the lawsuit?" Mikey asked. "Enough to destroy them," I said. "But we need to move faster. If he signs those closing papers on Friday, the money disappears to the Caymans. And if he keeps drinking like that, the kidney fails in a week." I looked at the screen one last time. Brandon was passed out now, the empty scotch glass rolling off his chest onto the floor. "He is a bad son," I said to the silence of the van. "He is a thief. He is a liar." I put on my hat. "But he is the only defendant I have, and I need him alive to face the jury." "Mikey," I said, "get me the address of that consulting firm in the Caymans, and get me everything you can on Marcus Thorne. Does he have a license? Any complaints?" Mikey grinned. He pulled up a file. "Marcus Thorne. License suspended twice for commingling funds. Currently on probation with the real estate board. And, oh, this is rich. He is married. To a very litigious woman named Vanessa, who happens to be the daughter of a local judge." I felt the first smile in days creep onto my face. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a demolition expert who just found the perfect spot to place the charge. "So, Courtney is sleeping with a married man whose wife has the power to end his career," I said. "And they are conspiring to defraud a dying man." I opened the door of the van. The rain had started again, a light drizzle that misted the city in gray. "Mikey, cut a highlight reel," I said. "The hand-holding at the bistro. The confession about the Caymans. The drugging conversation. And send a copy to Leo." "What are you going to do?" Mikey asked. "I am going to make a phone call," I said. "To Brandon?" "No," I said. Talking to Brandon is useless. He is too far gone. I am going to call Marcus Thorne's wife. I stepped out of the van. The plan was shifting. Originally, I just wanted my house back. I wanted my dignity. But now I saw the full scope of the infection. Courtney wasn't just a bad influence. She was a cancer. And you don't negotiate with cancer. You cut it out. I walked down the street, my cane tapping a steady rhythm. Click. Step. Drag. I found a quiet bench. I sat down and pulled out my phone. I looked at the number Mikey had texted me. Vanessa Thorne. I pressed dial. It rang twice. Hello? A woman's voice, sharp, impatient. Mrs. Thorne, I said. My voice was calm, deep, and steady. You don't know me, but my name is Gerald Patton, and I believe your husband is currently trying to sell my house to fund a new life with my daughter-in-law. There was a silence on the other end, a dangerous silence. I continued. And Mrs. Thorne? I have video and audio, and I think you and I have a common interest in making sure that sale never happens. Who is this? She asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. I am just a concerned father, I said, and a man who hates to see good money go to bad people. Meet me at the diner on 4th Street in an hour. I think you will want to see what I have. I hung up. I looked back at the bistro. Courtney and Marcus were leaving. They were laughing. Marcus had his hand on the small of her back. They looked like they owned the world. Laugh while you can, I thought, because the bill is coming due, and I am the collector. I stood up and hailed a cab. The pain in my side was a dull roar now, a constant reminder of what I had lost. But as I watched the city blur past the window, I realized I hadn't just lost a kidney. I had lost my blindness. I finally saw them for what they were. And for the first time in years, I knew exactly what I had to do. I wasn't just building a case. I was building a trap. The conference room on the top floor of First National Bank smelled of mahogany polish and stale anxiety. It was a room designed to make people feel powerful, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. But right now, it felt like a cage. My son, Brandon, sat at the head of the long oak table. He looked small. The high-backed leather chair seemed to swallow him whole. His skin was still that alarming shade of yellow, a testament to a liver working overtime to process the toxins he kept feeding it. Courtney sat to his right, her hand resting on his shoulder. To an outsider, it looked like a gesture of support. But I knew better. I saw the way her fingers dug into the fabric of his jacket. She wasn't comforting him. She was holding him upright. She was the puppeteer, and he was the marionette with cut strings. Across from them sat Marcus Thorne, the realtor. He was checking his watch every 30 seconds, his foot tapping a nervous rhythm on the carpet. And at the end of the table was Mr. Sterling, the bank's senior loan officer, a man with a face as blank as a fresh sheet of paper. I watched them through the glass wall of the lobby for a moment. They were so close to the finish line. The stack of documents in front of Brandon was thick. The closing papers. The final sale of my home to a cash buyer. An LLC that I suspected was just a front for Marcus and Courtney to siphon the equity. Leo Katz stood beside me. He adjusted his tie, which was crooked as always. Ready to crash the party? Leo asked quietly. I gripped my cane. The pain in my side was a dull throb today, not the sharp agony of yesterday. The medication was working. But the anger? The anger was a clean, burning fuel. Let's go, I said. We didn't knock. I pushed the heavy glass door open. It swung inward with a silent hydraulic sigh. The sound of Brandon's pen scratching against paper stopped. Courtney was the first to look up. Her eyes went wide and her mouth opened in a silent scream. She looked at Brandon, then at the bank officer, then back at me. "Security!" she hissed, standing up so fast her chair tipped over. "He is violating the restraining order. Call the police." Brandon dropped the pen. It rolled across the polished wood table. He looked at me with glazed, terrifying eyes. "Dad?" he whispered. "What are you doing here?" I didn't yell. I didn't raise my cane. I just walked forward, step by agonizing step, until I was standing at the foot of the table. Mr. Sterling looked up, annoyed. "Excuse me, gentlemen. We are in the middle of a private closing. If you don't leave, I will have to press the panic button." Leo stepped forward. He placed his battered leather briefcase on the pristine table. It made a heavy, authoritative thud that silenced the room. "I wouldn't do that, Mr. Sterling," Leo said, his voice calm and deep. "Unless you want the police to arrest everyone at this table for bank fraud." Marcus Thorne stood up, his face flushing red. "Who do you think you are? This is a done deal. The funds have been wired. We are just wet signing the deed. Get out." I ignored Marcus. I looked straight at my son. "You look tired, Brandon," I said softly. He flinched. I just want this to be over, Dad. I need the money, the medical bills." "Lies," I said. "Not the bills, the Cayman account." Courtney froze. "Mr. Sterling," Leo said, pulling a single document from his briefcase. It wasn't a thick file, just a single sheet of paper with a blue court stamp on the top. "My name is Leo Katz. I represent Mr. Gerald Patton, the legal owner of the property you are attempting to finance." "That is ridiculous," Marcus sputtered. "Brandon has the deed. We have the title, insurance." Leo slid the paper across the table. It spun slowly and stopped right in front of the bank officer. "That is a lis pendens," Leo said. "A notice of pendency of action. It was filed with the county recorder at 8 a.m. this morning. It alerts the public, and this bank, that the title to the property is currently subject to litigation regarding forgery and fraud." Mr. Sterling picked up the paper. His face went pale. He adjusted his glasses and read the text. "Forgery?" he asked, looking at Brandon. Leo pulled out a second document. "The hospital logs. We have evidence that the deed transferring the house to Brandon Patton was signed and notarized while my client was under general anesthesia for gallstone surgery 2 years ago," Leo explained. "Unless Brandon here guided his father's hand while he was unconscious, that signature is a felony." The room went deathly silent. The hum of the air conditioning sounded like a jet engine. Marcus Thorne looked at Courtney. Courtney looked at the floor. Brandon just stared at his hands, his shaking hands. Mr. Sterling looked at the closing papers in front of him. He looked at the check that was waiting to be handed over, a check for $400,000. He picked up the check. He tore it in half. Then he tore it again. "This closing is terminated," Mr. Sterling said, his voice cold and professional. "First National Bank does not finance disputed titles." "No!" Courtney screamed, lunging forward. "You can't do that! The wire transfer is already pending. It just needs your authorization code." "Revoked," Mr. Sterling said, typing a command into his laptop. "And I am freezing the escrow account immediately pending an internal investigation." He looked at Brandon. "Mr. Patton, I suggest you get a lawyer. A criminal lawyer. Because if this deed is proven to be forged, the bank will be filing its own charges for attempted mortgage fraud." Brandon put his head on the table. He let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. It was the sound of a man who knew the walls were finally closing in. "It's over, Courtney," Brandon mumbled into the wood. I told you he would find out." Courtney turned on him. "Shut up, you coward! We just need to explain!" She turned to me, her eyes blazing with hate. "This is what you wanted, isn't it? To see him fail? To see your own son destroyed? You are a monster." I looked at her. I looked at the red dress she had worn to meet her lover. I looked at the fear behind the rage. "No, Courtney," I said. "I didn't want him to fail. I wanted him to be a man. But since he decided to be a thief, I am treating him like a thief." I turned to the bank officer. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. We will be in touch regarding the quiet title action." I signaled to Leo. We turned to leave. "Wait!" Marcus Thorne yelled. He ran around the table to block our path. "Look, maybe we can work something out. A settlement. If you drop the list pendants, we can cut you in. 20% of the sale. Cash. Today." I looked at Marcus. I looked at his sweaty forehead and his cheap suit. "Mr. Thorne," I said, "I suggest you check your phone." He frowned. "What?" "Check your phone," I repeated. "I believe your wife is trying to reach you. She and I had a very interesting conversation this morning about your commission structure and your lunch dates." Marcus pulled out his phone. He looked at the screen. His eyes bulged. He didn't say another word. He just ran out of the room, fumbling with his keys, leaving Courtney and Brandon behind. I walked out of the conference room. My cane clicked on the marble floor of the lobby. Click, step, drag. I felt lighter. The house was safe. For now. The money was frozen. For now. But as the elevator doors closed, shutting out the sight of my son weeping at the conference table, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a heavy, hollow sadness. I had just saved my home. But I had confirmed what I had feared in the darkest hours of the night. My son wasn't a victim of circumstance. He wasn't just influenced by a bad wife. He was a willing participant. He had forged my name. He had sold me out long before the kidney surgery. Leo looked at me in the elevator. "You okay, Gerald?" "No," I said. "I am not okay." I looked at the digital numbers counting down the floors. But I am done bleeding. Now we go to court. And we finish this. The mediation room was soundproof, but it felt loud. The silence was filled with the screaming tension of a family tearing itself apart. I sat on one side of the long, oval table, my cane resting against my knee. Leo Katz sat beside me, arranging his files with the slow, deliberate movements of a butcher sharpening his knives. Across from us sat Brandon and Courtney. They looked like a magazine cover that had been left out in the rain. Brandon was deteriorating. The yellow tint in his eyes had spread to his skin, giving him a sickly, waxen appearance. He was sweating, despite the room being chilled to 68 degrees. He kept wiping his palms on his designer trousers, leaving dark streaks on the fabric. Courtney, however, looked ready for war. She was wearing a white suit, projecting an image of innocence and purity that was so manufactured it made my teeth ache. She didn't look at me. She looked at the mediator, a retired judge named Mr. Henderson, who looked like he wanted to be on a golf course anywhere but here. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. He adjusted his spectacles and looked over the rims at me. "Mr. Patton," he began, his voice weary. "We are here to resolve the dispute regarding the property at 240 Oak Street and the restraining order filed against you. Your son and daughter-in-law have made a generous offer. They are willing to drop the restraining order if you agree to lift the list pendants on the property and allow the sale to proceed. In exchange, they will place $20,000 in an account for your assisted living arrangements." I didn't blink. $20,000. For a house worth nearly $1 million. For a kidney. For a lifetime of sacrifice. Courtney leaned forward before I could speak. Her voice was trembling. a perfect performance of a terrified victim. "Your Honor," she said, addressing the mediator as if we were in Supreme Court. "We just want peace. My husband is sick. He is recovering from a transplant. We need to sell the house to pay for his medical care. But his father—" She pointed a manicured finger at me. "He is vindictive. He is holding the house hostage because he is jealous of our success. He threatened to burn it down. We are just trying to survive." She reached over and took Brandon's hand. Brandon didn't squeeze back. He just stared at the water pitcher in the center of the table, looking lost in a fog of painkillers and fear. Mr. Henderson looked at me. "Mr. Patton, do you have a response?" I looked at Leo. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. "I don't want their money," I said. My voice was rough, like gravel grinding in a mixer. "And I don't want peace. I want the truth." Courtney scoffed. "The truth? The truth is you are a senile old man who forgot he signed a deed. You are embarrassing yourself." Leo Katz stood up. He didn't speak immediately. He walked to the window and looked out at the city, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then he turned back to the table. "Mr. Henderson," Leo said, his voice dropping to that low, dangerous register. "We are not here to debate my client's memory. We are here to discuss a crime." Courtney rolled her eyes. "Oh, here we go. The conspiracy theories." Leo ignored her. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a large, blown-up photograph. He placed it on an easel at the head of the table. It was an image of a signature. "Gerald Patton." "This," Leo said, tapping the image, "is the signature on the quitclaim deed filed 2 years ago. The deed that removed Mr. Patton's life estate rights and gave Brandon full ownership. It looks like a valid signature, doesn't it?" Brandon looked up. His eyes widened slightly. Leo pulled out a second image. It was another signature. This one was shaky. The lines were jagged. The loops were uneven. "And this," Leo continued, "is every check, every medical form, and every letter my client has signed in the last 5 years. You see, Mr. Henderson, 5 years ago, Gerald Patton suffered a hairline fracture in his right wrist while saving a coworker from a falling beam. Since then, he has had a documented essential tremor, a microshake in his hand." Leo pointed to the first image, the smooth, flowing signature on the deed. "This signature has no tremor," Leo said. "The pen pressure is consistent. The strokes are fluid. It was written by a hand that was steady, a hand that was young." Courtney slammed her hand on the table. "So what? Maybe he had a good day. Maybe he took something to steady his hand. You are wasting our time with handwriting analysis? That is junk science." Leo smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "We thought you might say that, Mrs. Patton, which is why we didn't stop at handwriting." Leo reached into his file and pulled out a thick stack of medical records. We subpoenaed the hospital logs from the day this deed was signed. October 14th, 2 years ago. Leo slid the papers toward the mediator. At 2 p.m. on that day, the exact time this document was stamped by the notary, Gerald Patton was in the post-anesthesia care unit at St. Mary's Hospital. He was unconscious. His vitals were being monitored every 15 minutes. We have the nurse's notes. We have the anesthesia record. Leo leaned over the table, bringing his face inches from Brandon's. "Unless your father learned to sign legal documents while in a propofol-induced coma, Brandon, this signature is a forgery." The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the vending machine down the hall. Mr. Henderson picked up the medical records. He read them. Then he looked at the deed. He looked at Brandon. "Is this true?" the mediator asked. His voice had lost all its weariness. Now it was sharp, judicial. Brandon opened his mouth. He looked like a fish out of water, gasping for air. I... Shut up, Brandon, Courtney hissed. She turned to the mediator. This is a fabrication. They forged the hospital records. This is a setup. Leo laughed. A dry, humorless bark. Forged hospital records? That is a federal offense, Courtney. Do you really think I would risk my license for that? But speaking of federal offenses, Leo pulled out one last document. It was the affidavit from the notary, Jessica Miller. We found Jessica, Leo said softly. It turns out, when the FBI knocks on your door, people get very talkative. She admitted she didn't see Gerald sign that paper. She admitted an old boyfriend asked her to backdate it and stamp it as a favor. She has agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. Brandon let out a sound that was half whimper, half sob. He slumped in his chair, burying his face in his hands. It's over, Courtney, Brandon mumbled through his fingers. They know. Courtney turned on him, her face twisting into a mask of pure venom. She grabbed his arm and dug her nails in. Don't you dare, she whispered violently. Don't you dare give up. We have the money in the offshore account. We can fight this. There is no money, Courtney, Brandon screamed, finally snapping. He shoved her hand away. His voice cracked, high and hysterical. The bank froze everything. The sale is dead. We are broke, and I am going to jail. He looked at me. Tears were streaming down his yellow, jaundiced cheeks. Dad, he sobbed. Dad, please. I didn't want to do it. She made me. She said we needed the capital. She said you wouldn't mind because you loved me. I looked at my son. I saw the pathetic, broken man he had become. A man who would steal his father's home and then blame his wife when he got caught. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt a cold, heavy finality. She didn't forge the signature. Brandon, I said quietly. You did. You held the pen. You betrayed me. Not her. You. Courtney stood up. She grabbed her purse. I am not listening to this, she spat. I am leaving. Call my lawyer. Sit down, Mrs. Patton, Leo said. He didn't raise his voice, but the command was absolute. She froze. We are not done, Leo said. The forgery gets us the house back. That is easy. That is just property. But we are also here to discuss the kidney. Courtney laughed nervously. The kidney? You can't repossess an organ. Everyone knows that. No, Leo agreed. We can't. But we can sue for the value of the gift when it was obtained through fraud. You see, Brandon didn't just steal a house. He stole a body part under false pretenses. He lied about his drug use. He lied about his lifestyle. He tricked his father into surgery. Leo looked at the mediator. We are amending our complaint to include a count of battery by deceit, and we are seeking punitive damages in the amount of $5 million. $5 million, Courtney screeched. You are insane. We don't have that kind of money. I know, Leo said, but your trust fund does. And since you were a co-conspirator who benefited from the fraud, since you lived in the house, spent the equity, and pushed for the surgery, we are naming you personally in the suit. Courtney's face went white. For the first time, the arrogance cracked. She looked at Brandon, then at me. She realized she wasn't watching a reality show. She was watching her life implode. Mr. Henderson closed his file. I think, he said, looking at the young couple with undisguised disgust, that mediation has failed. I am recommending this case go to trial immediately, and I am forwarding these transcripts to the district attorney's office. He stood up and looked at me. Mr. Patton, he said, I am sorry. No father should have to go through this. I nodded. I gripped my cane and stood up. The pain was still there, but I stood straighter than I had in years. I looked at Brandon one last time. He was weeping openly now, his head on the table, defeated. "You wanted to be a big man, Brandon," I said. "You wanted the house, the cars, the lifestyle. Well, now you have the biggest lawsuit in the county. Congratulations." I turned my back on them. I walked out of the room, Leo by my side. Click, step, drag. We were going to trial, and I was going to bring the whole temple down on their heads. The room was so quiet that the sound of Brandon weeping into his hands felt like a scream. The mediator, Mr. Henderson, was stacking his papers, ready to declare the session over. Leo Katz was closing his briefcase, the click of the latches sounding like the chambering of a round in a pistol. But I wasn't done. I sat there, my hand resting on my cane, watching the man I had raised, the man who had just tried to destroy me. Brandon lifted his head. His eyes were red, swollen, and filled with a desperate, terrified pleading. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw the little boy who used to scrape his knees and run to me for comfort. But that boy was gone. In his place was a stranger who had forged my name and stolen my home. "Dad," Brandon whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, you can't let them file criminal charges. I will go to prison. I will lose the company. I will lose everything." He reached across the table, his hand trembling as he tried to touch my arm. "We are family, Dad. I am your flesh and blood. You can't send your own son to jail, no matter what I did. I am half of you. That has to count for something." I pulled my arm back. His fingers grasped at empty air. "Flesh and blood," I repeated slowly. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. "Yes," Brandon cried, sensing a potential opening. "We are Patton men. We share the same DNA. You always told me that family protects family. I made a mistake, a horrible mistake. But I am your son. You gave me life." I looked at Leo. Leo looked at me. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were sad. He knew what was coming. He knew this was the nuclear option. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. It was time. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. My fingers brushed against the leather of my wallet, and behind it, a thin, yellowed envelope. It had been sealed for 32 years. The edges were frayed, and the paper was brittle. I had carried it with me to every house I had lived in, hidden in the back of safes, tucked inside old encyclopedias. I had prayed I would never have to open it. I had prayed the truth would die with me. But Brandon had forced my hand. He had used our blood connection as a weapon to guilt me into submission. He had used it to justify his entitlement. He claimed his inheritance was his birthright. I pulled the envelope out and placed it on the table. It sat there between us, a small, unassuming object that held the weight of a collapsing star. "What is that?" Courtney asked, her eyes narrowing. Brandon wiped his nose with his sleeve. "Dad." "You keep talking about DNA, Brandon," I said, my voice low and steady. "You keep talking about flesh and blood. You think that biology is a get-out-of-jail-free card. You think that because you carry my name, you are entitled to my sweat, my labor, and my forgiveness." I placed my hand on the envelope. "But you are wrong." Brandon frowned. "What do you mean?" 32 years ago, I said, staring straight into his eyes. "Your mother and I were going through a rough patch. I was working double shifts at the bridge site. She was lonely. She met a man at the grocery store. His name was Paul. He was a sales rep, handsome, charming, everything I wasn't." Brandon went still. Courtney stopped checking her phone. Even the mediator stopped packing his bag. "It was a brief affair," I continued. "She ended it after 2 months. She came back to me crying, begging for forgiveness. We worked it out. We rebuilt the marriage. Or I thought we did. And then 4 weeks later, she told me she was pregnant. I tapped the yellow envelope. I was happy. I was ecstatic. I wanted a son more than anything in the world. But there was a doubt. A mathematical doubt based on the timeline. Your mother didn't want to know. She was terrified. But I needed to know, so when you were born, before I signed the birth certificate, I had a test done. Back then, it wasn't a cheek swab. It was blood work. Expensive. Private. Brandon's face had lost all its color. He looked like a wax figure. I opened the envelope. The sound of the tearing paper was loud in the silent room. I pulled out a single sheet of dot matrix printer paper. The ink was faded, but the numbers were still legible. I slid the paper across the table to him. Read the bottom line, Brandon. He stared at the paper. He didn't want to touch it. He looked like it was radioactive. Read it! I commanded, my voice booming off the walls. Brandon looked down. His lips moved silently as he read the technical jargon. Then his eyes stopped at the conclusion. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. He let out a breath that sounded like he had been punched in the gut. He read it again, and again. No, he whispered. No, that's not real. It is real, I said. I am not your biological father, Brandon. I never was. Brandon looked up at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a horror that went beyond the legal trouble. This was existential. His entire identity, his history, the patent genes he blamed for his kidney failure. It was all a lie. But you raised me, he stammered. You were there when I fell off my bike. You taught me to shave. You paid for college. I did, I said. I made a choice. That day, when I got the results, I sat in my truck in the hospital parking lot for 4 hours. I watched the rain hit the windshield. I had a choice. I could walk away. I could divorce your mother, leave you to the system, or make her find Paul. But I went back inside. I walked into the nursery. I picked you up, and I made a promise. I promised that I would be your father, not because of biology, but because I chose to love you. I signed the birth certificate. I gave you my name. I buried the secret because I didn't want you to ever feel like you didn't belong. I leaned forward, the pain in my incision flaring, but I ignored it. I gave you a life, Brandon. I gave you a home. And last week, I gave you a kidney. I gave you a piece of my body to save yours, knowing full well that we didn't share a drop of blood. I did it because that is what a father does. Brandon started to sob again, but this time it wasn't manipulative. It was the sound of a man watching his soul disintegrate. But you, I said, my voice hardening, you looked at that love and you saw weakness. You saw an ATM. You saw a spare parts depot. You forged my signature. You evicted me. And when you got caught, you tried to hide behind flesh and blood. Leo Katz stepped in then. He didn't need to be dramatic. The facts were dramatic enough. He placed a new document on the table. This changes the legal landscape significantly, Leo said. Courtney looked up, her eyes darting around the room. How? How does it change anything? He adopted him. Legally, he is still his son. Leo smiled, a shark sensing blood in the water. Actually, it changes everything regarding the assets. You see, the theory of gross ingratitude allows a donor to revoke a gift if the recipient attempts to take the donor's life or commits a serious crime against them. We have the forgery. We have the fraud. That is enough to revoke the house. Leo paused, letting the words sink in. But there is more. Since Brandon is not a biological descendant, and since Gerald has now discovered that the love and affection which formed the basis of his past financial support was met with criminal deceit, we are filing for a complete disinheritance. Leo turned to Brandon. And the kidney? We can't take it back. But because you are not a blood relative, the presumption of gift is much weaker when we combine it with the fraud. You lied about your drug use. You lied about your financial status to induce the surgery. That is fraud in the inducement. We are suing you for the market value of the medical procedure, pain and suffering, and the long-term cost of Gerald's reduced kidney function. Brandon wasn't listening to the legal terms. He was staring at me. You knew? He whispered. You knew this whole time? I nodded. And you still gave me the kidney? Yes. Why? He asked, his voice breaking. Why would you save me if I wasn't yours? Because you were my son, Brandon, I shouted, slamming my hand on the table. Because I loved you. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. But you killed him. The son I loved, he died the day he handed me eviction papers 3 days after I saved his life. You are just a stranger named Paul's son who happens to be wearing my face. Courtney stood up. She looked at Brandon, who was a mess of snot and tears. She looked at the DNA test. She looked at the lawsuit Leo was holding. She did the math. No house, no inheritance. A husband facing prison time. A husband with a failing transplant and a drug addiction. And now a husband with 0 family pedigree. She grabbed her purse. I am done, she said coldly. Brandon looked up. Courtney? I am not doing this, Brandon, she said, not even looking at him. I signed up for a CEO, not a broke, illegitimate fraud who is going to jail. She looked at me. You win, old man. Keep the house. It is probably full of mold anyway. She turned on her heel and walked out. The door clicked shut behind her. Brandon didn't even watch her go. He was staring at me. He looked like a child who had been left alone in a dark supermarket. Dad, he whimpered. She left me. I picked up my cane. I picked up the yellow envelope. She didn't leave you, Brandon. She liquidated her investment. There is a difference. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but my heart felt light. The secret was out. The burden I had carried for 30 years was gone. I had laid it on the table, and it had crushed the lies my son had built his life on. Dad, wait, Brandon pleaded, reaching out again. Where are you going? What do I do? I looked down at him. You do what I did 30 years ago, I said. You face the rain. You take responsibility. I turned to Leo. File the papers, Leo. Revoke the deed. I want him out of my house by sundown. But where will I go? Brandon cried. I have no money. I have nowhere to go. I stopped at the door. I looked back at him one last time. There is a bed open at Shady Pines, I said. I hear they have a shuttle. I walked out of the mediation room. I walked down the long hallway of the courthouse. I didn't look back. I could hear Brandon calling my name, but it sounded like a ghost from a past life. I walked out into the sunlight. The air smelled of exhaust and city dust, but to me, it smelled like ozone after a storm. I was 69 years old. I had 1 kidney. I had a cane. And I was alone. But as I stood on the courthouse steps, watching the traffic flow by, I realized something. I wasn't just a survivor. I was free. Leo walked up beside me. He lit a cigarette, ignoring the no smoking sign. That was brutal, Gerald, he said quietly. It was necessary, I replied. Leo exhaled a plume of smoke. What now? We get the house back. We win the lawsuit. You are going to be a rich man when we liquidate his assets. I looked at the city skyline. I don't want the money, Leo. Sell the house. Give the proceeds to the National Kidney Foundation. Leo raised an eyebrow. All of it? All of it. Except for enough to buy a used RV. An RV? Leo asked, smiling. Yeah, I said. I spent 40 years building bridges to connect places I never visited. I think it is time I crossed a few of them. I took a deep breath. But first, let's go get a burger. I am starving. Leo laughed and clapped me on the shoulder. Lunch is on me, he said. We walked down the steps together. Behind us, the heavy wooden doors of the courthouse remained closed, sealing away the wreckage of the past. I didn't know where the road would lead, but for the first time in a long time, I was the one driving. And as for Brandon, he had his life. He had my kidney. He had the truth. What he did with them was no longer my problem. Courtney didn't slam the door. She didn't scream or make a scene. She simply closed the heavy wooden door of the mediation room with a soft, final click. That sound was louder than any explosion. It was the sound of a parasite detaching itself from a dying host. Through the glass panel, I watched her walk down the hallway. She didn't look back. She was already on her phone, likely deleting the wedding photos from her social media, scrubbing her digital life clean of the man she had just destroyed. She was a survivor in the cruelest sense of the word, moving on to find a new victim before the body of the old one was even cold. Brandon sat frozen in his chair. He stared at the closed door, his mouth slightly open, unable to comprehend the speed of her abandonment. He looked at the empty seat beside him, then down at his hands, the hands that had forged my signature, the hands that were now shaking uncontrollably. He tried to stand up. He tried to run after her. But his body, weakened by the surgery and battered by the stress of his own lies, betrayed him. He crumbled back into the chair, clutching his side. He let out a low moan, a sound of pure, distilled misery. He was alone, truly alone. For the first time in his life, there was no father to catch him, no wife to prop him up, and no money to buy his way out. The collapse of his empire was swift and brutal. It didn't take months. It took hours. By sunset that evening, the sheriff's deputies arrived at 240 Oak Street. They weren't there to evict me. They were there to enforce the revocation of the deed. I didn't go to watch, but Leo told me about it. He said Brandon stood on the curb, holding a single plastic bin of clothes. The same black trash bags he had thrown at me were now piled around his feet. The luxury SUV was gone, repossessed by the leasing company the moment the credit freeze hit. The neighbors, the ones he had tried so hard to impress with his parties and his lies, peered out from behind their curtains, witnessing his shame. 2 days later, the news hit the business journals. Brandon's startup had filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The investors, spooked by the fraud allegations and the CEO's public meltdown, pulled every dime. His reputation, which he valued more than his soul, was shredded. He wasn't known as a tech innovator anymore. He was known as the man who stole a kidney from his father and still managed to lose everything. But the worst blow wasn't financial. It was physical. The stress, the alcohol, and the lack of proper post-op care took their toll. Brandon was admitted to the county hospital, not the private luxury wing, but the general ward. His body was rejecting the kidney. The organ I had given him, the piece of me that was still inside him, was fighting to get out. He lay in a bed with scratchy sheets, surrounded by strangers, hooked up to machines that beeped in the darkness. He had wanted to be a king. He ended up a pauper with a failing body and a name that nobody wanted to speak. He had traded a father's unconditional love for a pile of gold, and he found out too late that the gold was just painted lead. He had lost his past, his present, and his future. And as he lay there, shivering in the cold light of the hospital room, he finally understood the true cost of the papers he had handed me just a week ago. The engine of the 1998 Winnebago didn't purr. It growled. It was a deep mechanical rumble that vibrated through the steering wheel and into my hands, reminding me that I was in control. For 40 years, I had driven sedans that were sensible and quiet. I had driven to job sites, to grocery stores, and to parent-teacher conferences. I had driven the path of duty. Now, I was driving the path of dust and glory. I pulled into a spot overlooking the rim of the Grand Canyon. The sun was setting, painting the jagged rocks in shades of purple and burnt orange. It was vast. It was ancient. And it didn't care about credit scores, lawsuits, or ungrateful children. It just existed, just like me. I shut off the engine. The silence that followed wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. I stepped out of the RV. The desert air was cooling rapidly, but I didn't mind. I adjusted my hat and leaned on my cane. The pain in my side was still there, a dull ache that flared up when the barometric pressure dropped. But I had made peace with it. That scar wasn't a wound anymore. It was a receipt for a transaction where I paid a heavy price to learn the value of my own life. I set up my folding chair and poured a cup of coffee from a thermos. Dr. Patel had called me yesterday, not as a doctor, but as a friend. She told me her son was thinking about engineering school. I told her to send him my old textbooks. We laughed. It was the first time in years I had laughed without worrying if I was being too loud or too embarrassing. My phone buzzed on the small camping table. I looked at the screen. It was a number I didn't have saved, but I recognized the area code. It was the area code for the county hospital. I picked it up. A text message. Dad. It is Brandon. I borrowed a nurse's phone. They moved me to a state facility. It smells like urine here. The food is inedible. I am scared. Please. I know I messed up, but I am dying. Just come visit. Just once. Please. I stared at the words. I read them twice. A month ago, that text would have broken me. I would have turned the car around. I would have drained my savings. I would have offered my other kidney if it meant taking away his pain. But I wasn't that man anymore. That man had been surgically removed along with the organ. I looked at the canyon. I thought about the bridge I used to build. I remembered a rule in engineering. When a beam is rotten, you don't patch it. You don't paint it. You cut it out before it brings down the whole structure. Brandon wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking for a host. He was a parasite looking for a vein to tap. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel hate. I felt nothing. It was the cold, clean indifference of a man who has no more to give. I didn't type a reply. I didn't ask how he was. I pressed the block contact button. Then, I deleted the message thread. Gone. I put the phone down and picked up my coffee. The steam rose into the twilight air, disappearing into the vastness of the sky. I took a sip. It was black, bitter, and hot. It tasted like freedom. I am Gerald Patton. I am 69 years old. I have one kidney, a used RV, and the open road. And for the first time in my life, I am exactly where I belong. I watched the last sliver of the sun dip below the horizon. The day was over. The darkness was coming. But I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore, because I knew that tomorrow the sun would rise only for me. For decades, I believed that fatherhood was a contract of endless sacrifice. I thought that if I gave enough, my money, my home, even my own flesh, it would eventually buy loyalty. I was wrong. The hardest lesson wasn't learning to live with one kidney. It was learning that you cannot warm a heart that has chosen to be cold. Family isn't defined by DNA or the name on a birth certificate. It is defined by who stands beside you when the storm comes. I learned that it is better to walk alone in dignity than to be dragged down by those who only love you for what they can take. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is stop bleeding for people who would never bleed for you. If you believe that respect must be earned and not just inherited, hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story where justice is finally served. See you on the next road.